I've seen a lot of things in the past 18 months that have shocked me, but this is, I think this is particularly shocking. I've got to be careful what I say. I'm aware of that, but this is. Everyone always talks about whether boxing is a sport or whether it's a business, and the board are always in a difficult position because ultimately the promoters run the sport and the promoters are running businesses, and so there's always this power struggle. And we've seen with judging previously, and we've seen with all sorts of things happening over the past year. But this one is difficult to look at when a fighter fails a drugs test, and in any other sport there wouldn't even be a debate. And so I don't know what's going on right now. It's quite shocking.
But Ben, as a promoter in this industry, if the fight goes ahead at the O2 on Saturday night, how will you feel?
I'm worried about the sport because we do so. Boxing's always been seen as a sort of a dirty sport, but believe me, there's so many good people in this sport, from top to bottom. Fighters that have been calling me since this has happened, trainers, everything. And when we got into the sport, and this isn't about us, we looked at the sport and thought, there is a different way of doing this, a different way of presenting this, to make it more palatable, to make it easier for the mainstream to buy into it. But this is farcical, and yeah, I'm worried about the sport because it's almost 5 steps back when boxing over the past 6 months has maybe made some steps forward. This is really, yeah, this is a tough one to take. I work in the sport. I'm worried about perhaps what this might do.
As you speak, I'm getting news this lunchtime. I'm getting the opinion of a leading sports lawyer, so I'll keep his identity to myself. So Ben Spencer Simon, he says, strictly speaking, Conor is not guilty of a drugs violation, and the British Boxing Board of Control has no process in place to censor a fighter or cancel a fight when a VADA A sample returns a positive test. They can only therefore withdraw authorization for reasons of sporting integrity. Does that add up?
Yeah, that's up. But how many times being careful, how many times has an A sample been different to a B sample? It's a strict liability thing, drugs. It's a prohibited substance on WADA, with VADA, with UCAD, with the British Boxing Board of Control. The B sample is being withheld for whatever reason, and has been withheld for a while. And so we're stood here, with a failed drugs test, and that's all there is to say. I don't,
Listen, as an ex-boxer, mate, I can jump in and sort of help you out on that one a little bit. The B sample, 99.9 times out of 100 comes back the same. And the only reason I know that is because the A and B samples are just split from one. So say if it's a urine test, we do a urine test into a bottle and they split it into an A and B thing. So the test is the test, isn't it? So it comes back what it comes back. So if the A comes back, I'm sure the B would come back the same.
I think what that voice is saying is that there's a mechanism that's going to avoid or evade the British Boxing Board of Control to enforce any sanctions. That's what he's saying. There isn't a mechanism within the confines of an agreement.
But that's why
that's the challenge.
That's why he opens by saying, "Is it a sport or is it a business?" Obviously, there's legal reasons, ways round things and things like that, and ducking and diving and injunctions and withholding these samples, and there's all sorts of stuff that you can do as a promoter. But ultimately, there's a fighter going in there that's failed a drugs test, and again, is this a sport or is this going to be subject to a loophole or business or
Ben,
very good lawyers?
You came into the sport, presumably, and I don't want to sound unkind because there's a lot of money to be made. Yeah. The promoters will make a fair amount of money, so will the fighters if this goes ahead. So to a very, very large extent, this is down to money, right?
Look at the way...
So if you are either the promoter of Eubank Jr. or the promoter of Ben, be honest. Would you let your fighter fight or would you pull him?
I don't think Eubank Jr. I don't know what his team are saying, but how could you let a fighter go in the ring? He could get hurt. What happens if something happens on Saturday night? Once the board we had a similar, not a similar situation. We just
fight.
We pulled Shields Marshall because the Queen passed away a couple of days before, and the board made their decision. Yes, there's less money in that fight. There's still money on the line. You respect the decision. You respect the sport. This is complete disrespect for the sport. But and look at the general verdict of the public opinion out there. There's there's only the promoters that think this event should go ahead, and I don't want to put it all on the promoters. I get there's a lot of money to be made. I understand their difficult position. It's the mechanism, it's the board, it's the sport, it's the fact that nothing can be done. That's a worrying sign.
But I'll ask you again: if Eubank Jr. or Ben was your fighter, would you pull the fight?
I don't. Yeah, I once a fighter of mine or the others failed a drugs test, the fight would be off.
End of. And then rescheduled further down the line, or off for good.
It's then up to the board and the bodies and the UCADs and the VADAs to determine what's actually gone on.
Wait, where does the board? I mean, how does the
happened
Board
before.
of Control look in all of this?
Jim, this has happened before, you know. It happened in the States only last year with
Yeah.
a young kid, Oscar Valdez, who was a champion, who failed a drugs test. And the fight did still go ahead. He won the fight and won it convincingly, and actually he battered the guy a little bit. So
I think also when the board for me is a regulator of the sport in this country, when the board prohibits about, for me as a promoter, you have to listen. If we're going to get to the stage where, no, actually I'm now bigger than you and I'm going to do the event anyway, regardless of what you say, regardless of the checks and balances you have in place, then what are we? What sport have we got? It's a free for all. It's a circus.
It could be a seminal moment because we've got a board that's configured as a charity and not as a government-endorsed regime that isn't ultimately legislative in its powers. Interesting that Conor Benn pays to have a VADA test, pays to be signed up to it, and disregards the results when they come back. These are interesting dynamics. So the bottom line is that we have to decide. Ben's argument and statement would be, this was my fighter, I would want to make sure I would pull it out. Either side of the argument, if I was the fighter on the receiving end of a drugs-failed fighter or the fighter that had failed the drug test, I wouldn't look at the dynamics of trying to find a way around this. However we dress this up, however we want to dress it up, everyone that's involved in this fight is complicit if it goes on, because this is reputationally toxic. There's no two ways about it. This is a failed, not an adverse finding, a failed drug test being overcome by technicalities. And that's the end of it. And if boxing wants that on its doorstep, that's what it's now got. And the British Boxing Board of Control are looking a little bit like eunuchs because they cannot do anything about it or may not be able to do anything about it. And then they'll have to argue this position in court possibly. And whether they've got good lawyers or not is a different matter. It's a catch-weight fight that doesn't have any belts at the end of it. So it's not a sporting integrity-based decision. Sure. It's a money-based decision. And whether commercial law trumps sporting integrity and an injunction can be argued that way will be the turning point on this. And I hope that it doesn't give the Boxing Board of Control an opportunity to say, well, we wanted to stop it, but we couldn't.
Sure.
Yeah.
Jim White and Simon Jordan. Monday to Friday mornings from 10 on AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.